Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky hands out medals to Ukraine's Marines on the front line after returning from the G7 summit in Japan.
Explosions heard in Sudan's capital just minutes after a US and Saudi-backed truce takes place.
A fresh search is underway at a reservoir in southern Portugal for the body of Madeleine McCann, whose disappearance in 2007 remains a mystery. After returning to Ukraine from Japan and Saudi Arabia, President Vladimir Zelensky paid a visit to Marines on the front line. The servicemen and women present were awarded with medals marking the Day of the Marines.
Від вас все залежить, знайте це. І ми точно усвідомлюємо, хто цю перемогу несе на своїх плечах. Тож бережіть ще раз себе. Дякую за службу. Слава Україні. Слава українському народу, морській піхоті.
Meanwhile, the situation along the Russian border region of Belgorod remains tense. Several villages came under fire on Monday. At least 8 people were injured, according to the region's governor.
Погибших среди мирного населения на сегодняшний день нет. Все необходимые действия со стороны силовых структур, они проводятся. Ждем окончания, завершения контртеррористической операции, которая вчера была.
On Tuesday, the Kremlin said that its armed forces wiped out a group of militants that were dispatched to its southern Belgorod region from Ukraine.
Ukraine says it's continuing to fight for Bakhmut and that its troops remain in control of a corner of the eastern city. Kyiv has denied that Bakhmut has fallen to Russian forces, confirming that battles are ongoing. However, Russia's Wagner mercenaries claim they'll transfer control of the ruined hotspot to the Russian army by June. There's no doubt that both sides have lost vast numbers of troops in the fight for the city, which is of more symbolic than strategic value. Ukrainian medics are transferring their wounded to a hospital in the rear. Russian shelling is continuing on several targets. Over the last 24 hours, at least 23 border and frontline settlements in the Kharkiv region came under fire, and at least 3 people were killed in resulting explosions. The Ministry of Defense in Moscow said their forces carried out overnight strikes with high-precision missiles against the Dnipro airfield. Ukraine forces claim the strikes hit a nearby emergency facility, which it said was a gross violation of the Geneva Convention.
Just minutes after a 7-day ceasefire brokered by the US and Saudi Arabia came into effect, Sudan's warring parties continued to fight each other. Witnesses reported airstrikes and clashes in the capital Khartoum and elsewhere. The new truce officially began at 9:45 local time Monday evening.
Both parties have been calling on me to condemn the respective other side's actions. I call on both to end the fighting and to return to dialogue in the interest of Sudan and its people.
Previous attempts to achieve a lasting pause in hostilities in the northeast African country have been shaky or collapsed. The new deal is supposed to be enforced by what experts call a ceasefire monitoring mechanism meant to pave the way for humanitarian relief for those trapped by the fighting. The conflict between warring generals, which began on April the 15th, has so far left hundreds killed and displaced more than 1 million people.
These are the final votes from numerous Turkish embassies and consulates around the world. In places like Italy, the ballot boxes have been closed and sealed. The deadline is approaching for many Turkish voters living abroad as the country is gearing up for the second round of the presidential elections scheduled for next Sunday. In the first round, over 1.7 million voters cast their ballots, and these votes from the Turkish diaspora could prove decisive in determining the victor in the second round. Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan is currently the front-runner, having secured 49.5% of the votes on the 14th of May, a cushion of almost 5 points over the leader of the opposition coalition, Kemal Kılıçdaroğlu. Erdogan has since received the backing of nationalist Sinan Oğan, who garnered 5% of the votes in round one.
The Indian Prime Minister has been given a warm welcome by his Australian counterpart as Narendra Modi continues his second official visit to the country. Thousands of Indian migrants and citizens of Indian origin filled the stadium in Sydney to hear Modi praise the cooperation between the two countries and to witness a display of Indian culture. The purpose of Modi's trip is to strengthen diplomatic, economic and defence ties, especially in the context of growing tensions with China. Beijing's increased assertiveness has reactivated the Quad, an informal grouping of countries including Australia, Japan, India and the US that promotes cooperation and dialogue on security issues in the Indo-Pacific. The Spanish police have arrested 4 people accused of hanging a doll of the Real Madrid Brazilian player Vinicius from a bridge in Madrid. They're treating the incident as a hate crime. The act was denounced on Twitter and the Spanish League brought it to the attention of the authorities. Yesterday, the president of the Royal Spanish Football Federation condemned racist insults directed at Vinicius at Sunday's match in Valencia.
Mientras que haya un solo aficionado, un solo indeseable o un grupo de indeseables que insulte por condición sexual, por color de piel, por credo, pues tenemos un grave problema.
The racism, denounced by Vinicius himself and many others, has caused an international uproar. The Brazilian president showed his support, and the Christ of the Redeemer statue in Rio de Janeiro was turned off as a sign of solidarity.
Sniffer dogs are tracing the grounds of the Araje Reservoir in Portugal, where the renewed search for the possible remains of Madeleine McCann continues for a second day. The area is nearly 50 kilometres from the Algarve resort, where the 3-year-old was last seen nearly 2 decades ago. Overseen by Portuguese, British and German police, the operation had been requested by the German Federal Criminal Police Office. McCann's parents had been vacationing in the Praia da Luz resort in May 2007. They had left Madeleine and her 2 younger siblings in the apartment while eating at an adjacent restaurant. The prime suspect is a German man, now 45, who is currently serving a 7-year prison sentence for the rape of an American woman in the Algarve. In October last year, prosecutors had also filed charges against the man for 5 other sexual offences. Police suspect Madeleine was abducted and subsequently murdered. However, a body has never been found. In Romania, primary and secondary school teachers are on strike for the 2nd day in a row, demanding higher salaries. Some 150,000 teachers say they do not want to resume work until the government meets their demands. Currently, the starting salary for teaching staff is 2,400 lei, the equivalent of about €480 a month. The national average salary in Romania is the equivalent of about €916 a month. This is the first time since 2005 that teaching staff in Romania have gone on strike.
Bulgaria is to have 2 rotating prime ministers as the country's 2 main rival political parties reached a deal to form a coalition government. The centre-right GERB party, which won April's general election, will alternate for the post of prime minister with a runner-up reformist coalition led by We Continue for Change. One PM will be a former European Commissioner for Innovation, Maria Gabriel. The deal aims to break a political deadlock in corruption-plagued Bulgaria.
Включително промени в структурата на прокуратурата и ВСС.
Eleonora fled to Berlin from Ukraine in March last year. Since then, she has lived in 5 places, one of which had no heating this winter. She has been unable to find a permanent house like many refugees in the city.
For me, it's very hard to say that I am homeless, but then I realized that in Berlin, a lot of homeless that looks like me, with maybe jobs, with all opportunities, but you just can't find home and you are homeless.
Berlin has been forced to turn an old airport into a refugee center with hundreds of container homes. Local governments say more financial support is needed, especially considering inflation. In Germany, there was a 78% increase in asylum applications in the first 4 months of this year compared to the same period last year. The national government has promised an extra €1 billion in funding, but some politicians say that's not enough. In Brandenburg, next to Berlin, there are plans to build 3,000 container homes this year. Petra Budke, a member of the state parliament, says that this isn't a long-term solution and that building permits need to be simplified.
We have to really build a lot more apartments in the future, and we have to start now. The bureaucratic procedure takes a very, very long time, and that could be shortened. That would really help a lot.
It has not just been a lack of supplies and resources that have been challenges. There have also been protests across Germany over plans for more accommodation. Some of those demonstrations have been organized by far-right politicians who are against having more refugees in their cities.
Eleonora has to leave her current apartment this week. She will be staying with friends for a while, but doesn't know what she will do afterwards. She is considering going back to Ukraine.
I don't want to survive and searching for flat every time or to be hungry. I just want to live fully my life, and I prefer to live a short life but happier with all emotions.
The national government is holding a meeting with local governments on dealing with asylum seekers in November.